It was the height of summer in 2023 when Daniel Pierce, a 27-year-old hiker from Colorado, set his sights on the Grand Teton National Park. Friends described him as adventurous but methodical. Someone who always carried a compass, a journal, and enough supplies to last a week in the wilderness. This trip, however, felt different. Daniel told close friends he had discovered something unusual in an old guidebook, a trail that wasn't listed on any official maps, a path leading into the deepest part of the park. When asked why he wanted to go alone, he simply said, "Some places you have to see for yourself." On the morning of July 14th, Daniel signed his name at the Jenny Lake Ranger Station logbook, noting his intended return date as July 19th. Rangers later recalled that he seemed calm, even enthusiastic, as he adjusted the straps of his weathered hiking pack and set off down the familiar trail. The weather was clear, the air crisp, and there was nothing to suggest that this would be his last recorded sighting. By the fourth day, when Daniel failed to return, his family grew worried. They tried calling his phone, but it went straight to voicemail. His sister drove from Denver to Wyoming and filed a missing person report. Within hours, rangers mobilized search teams equipped with drones, tracking dogs, and helicopters. They scoured the valleys, the ridgelines, and even the remote alpine lakes. But to their shock, not a single piece of evidence was found. No discarded gear, no food wrappers, no footprints along the muddy trails. As the search expanded, a ranger remarked how unusual it was to have nothing. Most missing hikers left behind at least one trace, a broken branch, a misplaced water bottle, or even a torn scrap of clothing. With Daniel, it was different. The forest seemed to have swallowed him whole. The more they searched, the more the landscape itself seemed hostile, resisting their efforts. Storms rolled in unexpectedly, cutting visibility. Dogs lost his scent within minutes, as if it had been wiped from the ground. By the end of the second week, the official search was scaled back. For Daniel's family, it was unbearable. His mother pleaded with authorities not to give up, but the rangers had no leads to follow. Quietly, whispers began to circulate in town. Some said Daniel had deliberately vanished to start a new life. Others claimed the Tetons had taken him, just as they had taken others before him. All that remained was an entry in the ranger's logbook, and a haunting question: where had Daniel gone? After stepping off that trail, as weeks turned into months with no sign of Daniel, the official case slowly slipped from headlines. But in the quiet corners of Jackson Hole and the small towns surrounding Grand Teton, whispers began to spread. Locals claimed his disappearance wasn't the first. In fact, they said there had been at least a dozen similar vanishings over the last 50 years. Hikers who strayed too far into the backcountry and were never seen again. Some called it bad luck, others blamed wildlife. But older residents insisted there was something far darker hiding in those mountains. One legend spoke of an invisible boundary deep within the Tetons, a sacred line no outsider was ever meant to cross. According to fragments of oral history, indigenous tribes had once forbidden entry into certain canyons, warning that spirits roamed there, protecting something ancient. Though the tribes had long since been displaced, the warnings lingered like echoes. Elders described hikers being lured off trail by strange sounds, only to vanish in places where no tracks remained. Some families of the missing even reported receiving eerie phone calls at night. Static, filled with faint breathing on the other end. Rangers, of course, dismissed these stories, chalking them up to grief and folklore. But among the search teams, unease lingered. A few volunteers admitted privately that during Daniel's search they had heard unsettling noises in the forest. rhythmic drumming that seemed to come from nowhere, and flashes of light darting between trees. One search dog reportedly refused to go past a particular ridgeline, whining and pulling backward, as though something invisible stood in its way. Official reports never mentioned these details, but the stories circulated anyway, fueling the mystery. The rumors only grew stronger when a retired park guide came forward with his own chilling memory. Decades earlier, he claimed, he had been leading a tour group when they stumbled upon strange symbols carved into tree trunks, spirals, circles, and markings that didn't match any known language. The guide dismissed them at the time as the work of pranksters, but after hearing of Daniel's disappearance, he wasn't so sure anymore. He said the symbols were carved deep, as if with tools older than steel, and that the trees themselves had grown unnaturally twisted around them. By the time the first anniversary of Daniel's disappearance arrived, the case had taken on a mythic quality. Tourists came to Grand Teton not just for the beauty, but to hear the unsettling tales from locals over drinks at roadside diners. Some swore Daniel had stumbled onto an ancient burial ground. Others believed he had uncovered something meant to remain hidden. Whatever the truth, one thing remained consistent in every story. Once you crossed that forbidden line, the forest didn't just hide you, it kept you. 2 years after Daniel's disappearance, Dr. Elaine Carter, an anthropologist from the University of Washington, arrived in Wyoming. She was not interested in missing person cases, at least not officially. Her research centered on indigenous tribes of the Northern Rockies, particularly their burial rites and spiritual practices. Yet as she pored over archival maps and tribal records, she stumbled on a recurring detail: references to a forbidden path in the Teton region, a place unnamed on modern charts, but described in hushed tones by elders. The more she compared these accounts, the more she realized the path ran close to where Daniel Pierce had vanished. Curiosity drove her into the backcountry. With only her assistant and a few hired guides, Dr. Carter trekked into the densest parts of the forest, retracing areas few had bothered to map. On the third day, after hours of navigating thick brush and uneven ground, she noticed something unusual: the faint outline of what looked like a trail. The path was barely visible, overgrown with moss and strangled by roots, but it bore the unmistakable marks of being once well traveled. Stones had been deliberately arranged at its edges, their placement too precise to be natural. The guides she hired grew uneasy. One of them, a middle-aged man who had lived in the region his whole life, refused to step foot onto the trail. He muttered something about cursed ground and insisted they turn back before nightfall. But Dr. Carter pressed forward, recording her observations, sketching the peculiar formation of the stones, and noting how the trees seemed to bend toward the path, their branches arching like ribs over a tunnel. The forest, which had been noisy with insects and birds just moments earlier, became deathly silent as she stepped onto the forgotten trail. As she advanced, she began to notice carvings on the bark of several trees. The markings were crude yet intentional: spirals, jagged lines, and what resembled sunbursts with hollow centers. They reminded her of the old legends she had studied in tribal manuscripts, symbols believed to mark thresholds between the living world and the spirit realm. The deeper she went, the more the forest seemed to distort. Light filtered strangely through the canopy, and distances felt stretched, as though the trail was pulling her forward faster than her own steps. By the time Dr. Carter realized how far she had gone, the trail abruptly opened into a clearing. It was a place that did not appear on any map she carried, and the guides who had remained behind swore later They could not follow her footprints past a certain point. Yet here she stood, in a silent, untouched hollow of the forest, where the air hung heavy with the scent of damp earth and something faintly metallic. She felt she had crossed into a place long hidden, and perhaps never meant to be rediscovered. The clearing Dr. Carter stepped into felt wrong the moment her boots touched its soil. Unlike the rest of the forest, where undergrowth sprawled wild and tangled, the ground here was unnaturally bare. No grass, no flowers, not even fallen leaves, just hard-packed earth, cracked like something had scorched it long ago. The air was unnervingly still, heavy enough that every breath seemed louder than it should have been. She looked up and noticed the trees bordering the clearing were twisted, their bark blackened as though burned from the inside out. Yet there was no sign of fire. Her first instinct was to document. She pulled out her notebook and sketched the shape of the hollow, which was perfectly circular, as though the forest itself had been carved away. The anthropologist in her recognized patterns, symmetry, and intentionality. But the human in her, the part that felt goosebumps crawl along her skin, couldn't shake the sense that she was being watched. Her assistant, standing just a few paces behind, whispered that he didn't like it here, and for once, Dr. Carter agreed but pressed on anyway. At the center of the clearing, something caught her eye, a faint glimmer of light reflecting off the soil. She knelt down and brushed away a thin layer of dirt, revealing what appeared to be a fragment of stone. As she dug deeper with her hands, she realized it wasn't stone at all, but a crafted object, something buried deliberately. The more she unearthed, the more resistance she felt, as if the earth didn't want to give it up. Her assistant shifted uneasily, muttering that the ground felt warmer than it should be, like there was heat pulsing beneath it. The silence of the place pressed harder with each passing second. No birds called overhead, no wind rustled the trees. Even her own movements sounded muted, muffled, as though swallowed before they could echo. She glanced up and noticed the treetops, leaning inward at odd angles, creating a dome-like shape that blocked out most of the sunlight. It wasn't just a clearing anymore. It felt like a chamber, as if the forest had grown around something it was trying to seal in. Dr. Carter's fingers finally hooked onto the edge of an object, buried just beneath the soil. She gave a sharp pull, and the dirt loosened, revealing a small shape wrapped in something leather-like, darkened by age. When she lifted it into her palm, she froze. The object was far too deliberate, far too intricate to be a coincidence. She realized at once that this was not a random find. It was a relic. And judging by the faint, almost metallic hum in the air that seemed to vibrate the moment she touched it, it was something meant to stay hidden. The object in Dr. Carter's hands was unlike anything she had encountered in her years of fieldwork. At first glance, it looked like a necklace, an amulet, bound together with strips of darkened hide. The leather was cracked and brittle, but it had held together remarkably well, as though preserved by something beyond time. Hanging from the cord was a small carved piece of bone, polished smooth but etched with patterns she didn't immediately recognize. The grooves were deep and sharp, almost glowing faintly in the muted light of the clearing. As she brushed more soil away, her assistant leaned in to get a closer look. That's when they noticed something that made their stomachs turn. Wrapped around the cord were fine strands of hair, human hair, long and light brown, tangled and knotted into the leather itself. It didn't look placed there accidentally. It was woven deliberately, as if binding the amulet together. Dr. Carter's mind raced. Could this have been part of a burial ritual? Was it an artifact of mourning? Or was it something else entirely? Something darker. The symbols etched into the bone piece grew more unsettling the longer she studied them. They weren't decorative. They carried intent. Circular spirals intersected with jagged lines, and at the center was a hollow mark that seemed to swallow light. Dr. Carter had seen similar references, only in fragmented tribal accounts. Warnings of objects created to anchor spirits or bind them to specific places. What unsettled her most wasn't just the design itself, but the precision. Whoever had carved it had done so with incredible skill, and perhaps incredible purpose. The amulet seemed to radiate a presence. The longer she held it, the heavier it felt, as though it was pulling her hand downward. Her assistant muttered that he felt dizzy just standing near it, and his voice quivered when he asked if they should put it back. But Dr. Carter couldn't let go. Her scientific curiosity overpowered her fear. This wasn't just an artifact. It was a key, a puzzle piece in a history that had been buried for centuries. And if her instincts were correct, it might explain why Daniel Pierce had vanished 2 years earlier. Before leaving the clearing, she wrapped the amulet carefully in cloth and placed it inside her pack. As she stood, she felt the silence of the clearing shift, like the faintest echo of a sigh passing through the trees. The forest seemed to react, branches creaking though there was no wind. Dr. Carter ignored it, telling herself it was imagination, but deep down she knew this object had not wanted to be found. Back at her university lab, Dr. Carter wasted no time analyzing the amulet. She began with the symbols, photographing them under high-contrast lighting, and running comparisons through her database of tribal iconography. The results sent chills down her spine. The carvings were nearly identical to markings, described in fragments of oral histories from a tribe, believed to have vanished centuries ago. In the Teton region, scholars had long debated whether this tribe had been wiped out, migrated, or, according to darker accounts, been taken by something in the mountains. Finding their symbols in physical form was extraordinary, but also deeply unsettling. Her research grew more disturbing when she decided to test the organic materials on the amulet. Samples of the leather and hair were sent to a genetics lab under her colleague's supervision. When the results came back, Dr. Carter stared at the report in disbelief. The DNA extracted from the hair matched the profile of a missing person already in the national database. Daniel Pierce, the same hiker who had vanished 2 years earlier. Somehow, strands of his hair had been woven into the amulet. The implications were terrifying. How could an artifact that appeared centuries old contain the DNA of a man who had gone missing only 2 years prior? Dr. Carter searched for rational explanations. Perhaps someone had crafted the amulet recently and buried it in the clearing to mimic tribal artifacts. But if that were true, how had the leather and bone shown signs of advanced aging and weathering far beyond 2 years? And who would go to such painstaking lengths, deep in the backcountry, to plant something no one was ever supposed to find? The more she studied the amulet, the stranger it became. At night, when she left it locked in her office cabinet, she swore she could still hear a faint humming sound resonating from inside the drawers. The janitorial staff complained of headaches when cleaning her floor, and one night, a graduate student swore they saw a shadow pass across Dr. Carter's office window. Even though the lights were off inside, the amulet wasn't just an artifact. It seemed to radiate a kind of presence, something that unsettled everyone who came near it. Dr. Carter's notes grew increasingly frantic. She wrote about the possibility of time folding in on itself, about rituals that bound souls to objects, about the Tetons being a place where the line between past and present had been deliberately broken. But more disturbingly, she noted that since retrieving the amulet, she felt as though someone was following her. Unseen, silent, yet constant. And though she told no one, she sometimes heard footsteps echoing behind her when she left her office late at night, always stopping the moment she turned around. It was early autumn, when Dr. Carter's colleagues began to worry. She had grown increasingly reclusive, avoiding staff meetings, missing lectures, and spending long hours alone in her office with the amulet. Her assistant confided to another professor that Dr. Carter hadn't been sleeping. She often muttered about voices in the static, and claimed the symbols were changing when she looked at them at night. Then, one weekend, she vanished. Her car was found parked outside the anthropology building, her laptop still open on her desk. But she was nowhere to be found. When campus security entered her office, they were met with a disturbing scene. Her notes were scattered across the floor. Pages filled with erratic handwriting and sketches of spirals, circles, and strange humanoid shapes with hollow eyes. The bookshelves had been overturned, as if she'd been frantically searching for something. On her desk, laid neatly in the center, was the amulet. It looked different than before. Cleaner, almost polished, as though someone had been carefully tending to it. And though the windows were locked, a thin layer of dirt covered the floor, as if the forest itself had seeped into the room. The most unsettling detail came from the building's night custodian. He swore that on the night before Dr. Carter's disappearance, he passed by her office around 2 a.m. and saw the light still on. Through the glass, he claimed he saw her standing perfectly still, holding the amulet in both hands, whispering words he couldn't understand. He tapped the door, but she didn't respond. When he blinked, he said, she was gone, vanished, though the light never flickered, and the amulet was still glowing faintly on the desk. After her disappearance, police sealed the office for investigation. Forensic teams found fingerprints belonging to Dr. Carter, but also several partial prints that couldn't be matched to anyone in the system. Even more bizarre, they discovered faint handprints on the inside of the window glass. Prints far larger than hers, pressed so hard into the surface that the glass had hairline cracks. The report quietly noted them, but no explanation was ever given. The case was quietly labeled missing adult, presumed voluntary, though no one on campus believed that. To this day, the amulet remains locked in evidence storage at an undisclosed facility. Rumors persist that it hums faintly after midnight, and that anyone who handles it becomes plagued by nightmares of twisted trees and shadowy figures watching from the tree line. Some whisper that Dr. Carter isn't truly gone, that she's still out there, somewhere deep in the Tetons, following the same trail that Daniel Pierce once took, and others believe the amulet is waiting, patiently, for the next person curious enough to touch it. And so, the mystery remains. A hiker vanished without a trace. An anthropologist followed his trail, only to disappear herself. And at the center of it all, a tribal amulet that should never have been unearthed. Was it a sacred object meant to guard something ancient? Or was it a vessel, carrying the lost souls of those who crossed the forbidden path? No one knows for certain. But if you ever find yourself wandering too deep into the Tetons, and the forest suddenly falls silent, remember Daniel Pierce. Remember Dr. Carter. And ask yourself one question before taking another step. What if the mountains are still watching you?
If you liked this video, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Most importantly, subscribe and hit the bell icon so the next secret finds you first.